Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater, home of the public programs for the UCLA Film and Television Archive. My name is Paul Malcolm. I'm the programmer at the archive. Thank you all for coming out to the latest screening in Hirokazu Kore-eda, Cinema from the Outside In, a citywide series dedicated to the work of Japanese master Hirokazu Kore-eda. This program began earlier this week with a screening of director Kore-eda's Nobody Knows at the USC Ray Stark Theater, which we followed last night with a screening of his Afterlife at the Downtown Independent. We will conclude this series with two more screenings here at the Wilder as the program moves over to the West Side. Director Kore-eda will return here again tomorrow night for our screening of his debut fiction feature, Mabaroshi. While he will depart back to Japan on Sunday morning and Sunday evening, we will be presenting his film Air Doll as well. So please check our website. Tickets are available for both of those screenings. Tonight, we are very pleased to present writer-director Kore-eda's sixth fiction feature film, Still Walking, from 2008. It has been a great honor and privilege to be able to host director Kore-eda here in Los Angeles at all of these screenings. It takes a number of partners to make a series like this possible, so I want to take a moment to thank them now. The series as a whole is being presented and supported by the Yanai Initiative for Globalizing Japanese Humanities at UCLA and Waseda University. So please help me thank them for making all of this possible. I want to give a special thank you to the Yanai Initiative's Professor Michael Emmerich, not only for everything he's done to make this series possible, but everything he's done to help us present all of the Japanese programming we've been doing here at the Wild over the last 2 years. So Professor Emmerich, thank you very much for that as well. Additionally, I'd like to thank our partners in this program, the Japan Foundation Los Angeles, the Academy Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and the USC School of Cinematic Arts, with a special shout out to Professor Akira Lippert there, as well as the UCLA Terasaki Center for Japanese Studies. A round of applause, okay? One more thank you to Acropolis Cinema. Acropolis Cinema is a local art house, independent, international screening organization in Los Angeles. We're very happy to be partnering with them for the first time for two of the screenings in the series. They are co-presented Afterlife at the Downtown Independent, and they'll be co-presenting Mabaroshi tomorrow night. Director Kore-eda began his career in the early 1990s, making documentaries for Japanese television, including Lessons from a Calf, However, and August Without Him. His fiction feature debut, Mabaroshi, premiered at the Venice Film Festival in 1995. He followed this extraordinary debut with a series of powerful, captivating films that looked at family, grief, loss, and memory in contemporary Japan that earned him critical accolades and numerous awards at major international film festivals, including Afterlife, Distance, Nobody Knows, Hana, I Wish, Like Father, Like Son, and his most recent film to be released theatrically here in the United States, last year's After the Storm. It's been really an honor to have him here with us, so please help me welcome to the stage director Hirokazu Kore-eda. Our interpreter for the evening is David Neptune.
Good evening.
今ご紹介に預かりまして、いろんな方のご尽力を得て、今日このすごく尊敬する監督の名前のついた劇場で、僕の作品が上映できることを本当に嬉しく思っております。感謝します。ありがとうございます。
First of all, I feel really honored to be here tonight. Thanks to the help from many people, I'm able to be here in the name of a theater that is a director that I really respect. So first of all, thank you very much for having me.
今から見ていただく作品は、自分が母親を2年ぐらい病院で、倒れた後2年ぐらい入院してたんですけどね、その母親が亡くなって何にもできなかったなと思って、すごい後悔の中にありまして、その時期に1ヶ月ぐらいで書いた脚本なんですよね。なのでこの作品を撮ることで多分自分は 自分の母親を亡くしたことを、乗り越えるというとちょっと大げさですけれども、自分の中で消化するために撮ったような作品です。
So this film I wrote after my mother passed away. She was in the hospital for 2 years before that time. And when she passed, I felt like I couldn't do anything for her, and I had a lot of regret. So during that time, over about a month, I wrote this film. And by writing it, I wouldn't say as much as that I was trying to get over it, but at least I was trying to process the grief.
なのでとても自分にとってはパーソナルな作品で、出来上がった時に、いつも僕の作品を扱ってくれるセールスエージェントがこれはちょっとトゥードメスティックだっつって、多分日本でしか理解されないんじゃないかって最初言われて、それもそうだなと思って、それはそれでしょうがないかと思ってたんですけど、結果的にはこの作品が一番多分世界中でいろんな国で、なんか見られてる感じがするんですよね。届いてるなと思って、その辺が映画の面白さであり難しさだなというのを実感した作品でもあります。
When this film was finished, my sales agent, who I work with a lot, said, "Oh, I think this film is too domestic, and only Japanese people will really get this film." And I thought, "Oh, well, that's how it goes." But this film actually is probably the film out of all of my films that was shown the most all over the world and reached the widest audience. So you never know; it's difficult to tell where films are going to end up.
このぐらいにして、あとは上映後にまた戻ってきますので、椅子も用意されてますから、お時間のある方は残っていただいて、そこで少し、映画についてお話しできればと思います。楽しんでください。よろしくお願いします。
So I'll stop it here. I'll be back here for a Q&A after the film as well. So I'm really looking forward to speaking with you all if you'd like to stay. And thank you very much and enjoy the film.
Please do stay for the Q&A. Please turn off all of your cell phones and enjoy Still Walking. Well, thank you again for being here with us. I wanted to actually go back to your introduction to start. The first thing that you said, or one of the things that you said, was that you were surprised, or you felt that this was a film about a Japanese family and that it might not speak to audiences outside of Japan. But it did, and you found that audiences were having a very strong response to it for their own very personal connection to the film. I'm curious if how that informed or influenced the way you think about the relationship between the local and the universal, and maybe the role or the nature of cinema itself in bridging those two things. And finally, what, if anything, might someone like myself, born and raised in America, but still loving this film and feeling very personally connected to it, might I be losing in translation regardless?
そうですね。ありがとうございます。そう、トゥードメスティックって言われて、しょうがないかなと思ってたんですけど、最初に海外で上映したのはどこだったかな、カナダのトロントかで、スペインのサンセバスチャンでやったあたりで、みんな笑ってくれますし、終わった後にバスクのすごいひげもじゃのおじさんが僕のところに来て、なんでお前は俺の母親のことを知ってるんだって言われたんですよね。でそれ同じことが韓国でも、サンパウロでもいろんなところであれは俺の母親だって人がいて、ああそうか、母親って結構共通なんだなと思ったんですよね。それで なんかそれまでは結構、ドキュメンタリーやってたってこともあって社会性みたいなものってどっかで意識をして、プロットにこう今の社会とか世界をどういうふうに巻き込むかみたいなことを意識的にやってた時期もあるんですけども、この作品以降なるべくその自分にとって切実なモチーフテーマを深く掘るっていう作業にむしろ限定してみようかなということで、しばらく作るようになりました。そういう変化を自分にもたらした作品だったですね。
So, like you were saying, I thought in the beginning that, oh, this is going to be too domestic and oh well, but I think Toronto was the first city that this film was screened outside of Japan, and then in San Sebastian, and people laugh at the funny moments. And I had a bearded man in Spain come up to me and say, "How is it that you know my mother?" And in San Paulo, it's the same thing. Someone in Korea said the same thing. So I thought, oh, maybe mothers are kind of universal. And I come from a documentary background, so I really try to incorporate society as part of the worldview. And after that sort of became a theme for me personally, then I decided to, after this film, really work that into my films, and that was kind of a change that I experienced through this film.
Is there anything in the film that may be so specifically Japanese in terms of maybe the relationship to grief or memory or past that might still need some explanation for non-Japanese viewers?
例えば、日本人じゃない観客に分かりにくいと思うようなところっていうのは何かありますか？あんまり分かりにくいから外すかっていうと外さなくなっちゃった最近ね。分かんないなりに何か伝わるだろうなっていうふうに思うので、何が分かりにくいんだろうねこれ。何かありますかね。蝶々、これはでも分かんないかなと思ったら意外と東南アジアは同じだって言われたんですけど、蝶々が死んだ人のこう生まれ変わりじゃないけど死んだ人の魂を運ぶのか運んでくるのか、そういうこう意味合いを持つ生き物だというのが、意外とアジア圏では共通するらしいというのは、見た方の感想で分かりました。
So I do wonder if what in this film would be kind of difficult to understand for a non-Japanese audience. Nowadays, if I do identify something in my films that I think, oh, maybe this would be hard for a non-Japanese audience, I don't take it out. I keep that in there. But I think the butterfly is something in Southeast Asia. I think butterflies often are thought of to carry the spirits of the deceased. And so that idea I've noticed is sort of universal in Asia.
だからおじいちゃん役の原田芳雄さんがもう亡くなってるんですけども、亡くなってお葬式に行ったら奥さんが「昨日ね庭に蝶々が飛んできたのよね」っつってなんか教えてくれて、ちょっとそういうのは感慨深かったですね。奥さんがねお葬式の席で教えてくれました。
The father character, the actor has actually passed away, but I heard from his wife that there was a butterfly at his funeral, so that was kind of a thought-provoking detail for me.
あと映画の中で黄色い蝶々はモンシロチョウが冬を越して戻ってきたんだって言ってますけど、あれは僕の母親が僕が子供の時に教えてくれた話なんですけど、嘘でした。全く別の生き物だというのが、後で分かりました。
The story that the white butterflies come back after the winter as yellow butterflies was actually a story my mother told me, but I found out that it was a lie. They're completely different species.
Well, speaking of your mother, you mentioned in your introduction that you began working on this film just a month or so after her passing. And the film itself is so much about the long shadow of loss and absence. And even years after the loss of the loss of their son, in the film, they're still trying to figure out what it means to them, still wrestling with his absence. I'm curious, so soon after your mother's passing, how much negotiation the son and the filmmaker, in you, had to negotiate in terms of what to reveal, what not to reveal, and how, if that negotiation did occur in that process, how that might have shaped the film that we saw today in the writing of it.
そうか、安倍さんとも初めての仕事だったし、キリンさんともこれが初めての仕事でした。安倍さんのキャラクターに自分自身を重ねてるかというと、そんなこともないな。ただ父親との関係がうまくいってないっていうのは、自分の父親との関係がストレートにこれを見ると出てるなっていう。僕の父も晩年は足を悪くして、ああいうふうに歩きにくくなってまして、なんか具体的な話の方が分かりやすいね。子供の頃はもう家族と一緒に歩いてても全然家族と一緒に歩かないで先に歩いてっちゃって、遅いと怒るような人だったんですけど、年を取ってからは杖つかないと歩けなくなっちゃったもんですから、今度家族の方が気を使って父親のペースに合わせなくちゃいけなくなってくるんですよね。その変化に一番僕は父親の老いを感じたんですけど、それで坂道で携帯がかかってきたふりをして追い越させるっていうシーンを書いたんですが、なんかそういう小さなエピソードの中にいろいろな記憶のディテールは、僕と父の関係、僕と母の関係っていうのは込められてますね。
Abe in the film, that was the first time I worked with him, and with Kiki Kirin as well. That was the first time I worked with her. For Abe's character, do I overlap myself with his character? Not really. But what was kind of from my own experience is that my relationship or the fact that things weren't going well with his father overlaps with my life, which in my father's later years, he had bad legs and couldn't walk very well. And specifically, he always would walk ahead of the family. And if we lagged behind, he would be frustrated with how slow we were. And so, but then in his later years, it was sort of the opposite, and the family intentionally slowed down to keep pace with him. And so that's why I wrote in that scene where he, at the end, acts like he's getting a phone call so that he can let his father kind of go ahead a little bit and catch up to him. So that was a big influence, for sure.
なんかストレートに何かキャラクターに誰かをっていう、僕自身をどこかにっていうことよりはね、本当にそういう断片とかちょっと置き換えてたりするんですよね。個人的な話ですけど、僕の母親の兄夫婦は若くして長男を亡くしているもんですから、お正月とかに僕の母親が僕を連れてその家に行くと、そのうちの両親が僕の成長にもういなくなってしまった息子の 影を見ようとするんですよね。僕の面影に僕にそのもういない息子の面影を重ねて見られてるっていうのが子供としてはすごくこう重かったんですよね。この人たちにとってはもういない息子の成長っていうのを多分ずっとこうやって見ていくんだろうなっていうようなことを感じたんですね。でストレートにそれがこうエピソードとしては出てこないと思いますけども、その感じっていうのかな、母親がその亡くした息子のことを思い続けてるっていうようなところには、そういう僕が経験したものもちょっと形を変えながら描いてますね。
So oftentimes I don't really directly overlap myself with characters in my films, but it's more like vignettes or pieces of memories that I incorporate. So for instance, this is a very personal story, but my mother's brother lost his child, his son, when he was very young. And so when I would go to their family's house for New Year's, they would always see their son's shadow in me. And so it was really, that was a really heavy experience for me as a kid. And so that's not directly in the film necessarily, but sort of the thoughts that the mother keeps having and thinking of her lost son and that sort of thing comes from some of those experiences.
There's obviously a lot of, we're talking about loss, we're talking about grief, we're talking about regrets, but there's also a really wonderful lightness to this film, an airiness and an openness, and so much of that seems to be a part of the location where you shot the film, which has this amazing topography too, the hills, the stairs, the view of the sea. Did you have that place in mind when you were writing the script, or did you find that in the process of location scouting? And could you talk a little bit about that place and how it also might have shaped the film in your shooting?
そうですね、母親を亡くして監督である息子が、母親に捧ぐって映画を撮ったら多分すごくウェットになるし、悲しいだけの映画になりかねなかったので、とにかくドライに笑えるようにっていう僕の母親のキャラクターになるべく寄せていこうと思って、それで軽さであるとかちょっと乾いた感じにしようっていうのは意識してました。一つは。
One thing is that as the son of a filmmaker who is the son of a mother who recently passed away, I didn't want the film to just be heavy and sad. So I definitely consciously thought about some of the characteristics of my mother, who was very dry and light and that sort of thing. So that was one thing.
海辺にしようと思ったらなんでだろうな。ちょっとはっきり記憶が残ってないな。海で死んだっていう、兄が海で死んでいるっていうのがエピソードとして最初にあったので、舞台を海沿いにしようっていう順番ですね。思い出しました。多分そっちが先ですね。なので明るさとかなんか開放感みたいなことを考えたわけじゃないですね。ただお墓が海を見下ろす場所にあるっていうのは大事だなと思ってました。その高低差を使いたいってのがあったんですよね。これ階段がしつこく出てくるんですけど、階段好きなのはもちろん好きなんですが、登ったり組み合わせを変えていろんな人がいろんな気持ちで登ったり降りたりするっていうのをなんかやりたかったんですよね。それでバス停から家までも階段ですし、家から山の上の墓地までもこう登ってく降りてくるっていう、なんかそういうのがやりたかったという感じですね。
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember exactly, but actually, what it was is because the older brother dies in the ocean. That was something that I had written before we found the location, and so I think that was why I chose Mizoi. And it wasn't that I necessarily had a light and airy location in mind specifically, but I did have an idea that I wanted the grave to be up high with a view of the ocean. So I used the stairs a lot. As you can tell, the stairs and the going up and down is a thing that comes up a lot in this film. And each time they go up or down, every character sort of has a different experience of that, and takes something different out of that moment. So for like from the bus stop to the house, from the house up to the grave, that sort of thing.
You had said in the Q&A at Nobody Knows that you don't, I can't remember how it came up, but that it came up in the Q&A that you don't drive and that you tend to walk or take the train somewhere. And that you also had it, so because of that it was difficult, or it's difficult for you to write characters or write scenes of people driving or write characters while they drive. I was struck by that because, of course, we're watching a film that tonight, at least in its English translation, is titled Still Walking. There's a lot of walking in the film. There's a lot of shots of trains, which is fantastic. But I'm very curious because the walking, the rhythm of the film is so delicate. The rhythm of the film feels also so grounded. I'm just this weird question. I'm wondering if the pacing of this film and the pacing of your films in general, there's a link between the way you move through the world on trains and walking and the way your films are paced, which keeps them so grounded and so human feeling.
I guess so.
そうかもしれないですね。車、映画の中の母親が息子の車に乗って買い物に行くのが夢だっていうのはね、僕の母親がずっと言ってて、そう亡くなる前入院してだいぶこう地方ボケが進行してベッドに、座って、僕がお見舞いに行ってベッドサイドで話してるとなんかほらそろそろ車で買い物にって言うんですよ。でこれはわざと言ってるのか本当にボケちゃったのかどっちなんだろうってよく分かんなかったんだけど、結局最後まで僕は免許を取らなかったので母親を車に乗せることができないまま亡くなってしまいまして、それはすごい後悔してるんですけど、映画の主人公はその後どうやらラストシーンで免許を取ってね家族を乗っけて運転してますけど、僕はいまだに嫁さんの運転する車の助手席に乗ってるんで、ちょっと僕の方が成長が遅いなっていうふうに思ってますけど、ちょっと余談です、すいません。
This doesn't have to do really with what you're talking about, but
of course not.
The mother in the film says how she dreams of her son one day driving her to go shopping, and that was actually my mother's dream as well, and she would always tell me the same thing. And when she was sort of nearing the end of her days and she was bedridden, when I would visit her, she would say, "Okay, I think it's about time to go shopping. You can take me now." And I wasn't really sure if she was saying it intentionally or if she was really sort of losing her memory and that sort of thing. But I never actually got my license before she passed, and so that was a huge regret for me. And in the end of this film, our character seems to have gotten a license and drives his family, but for me, my wife still drives me around.
I also always think about Still Walking as one of the great food films. There's so many great scenes of cooking. There's so many great scenes of eating. Can you talk a little bit about, I don't know, even the specific foods that we're seeing and how you maybe built the film around these scenes, which are just so fantastic?
I wonder what to say.
トウモロコシの天ぷらというかき揚げっていうのが母親がよく作ってくれてた料理で大好きだったんですよね。あんまり日本でもそんなにいろんなところで食べられるわけじゃなくて元をたどっていくとどうやら京都の精進料理らしいんですけど、なぜかうちは天ぷらっていうとあれが出てきたんですよね。で揚げてるとこうポンポンってトウモロコシがはじける音がして、ああ今日は天ぷらだっていう、なんだろう、もう今核家族化しちゃったから天ぷらって一番家で作るのめんどくさいでしょ。終わった後油の処理が大変だから家で食べないものになっちゃいましたけど、多分昔はおそらくいろんな家に行ってああいう天ぷらを揚げる音と匂いっていうのはあったから、ある一定の年齢より上の人たちにとってはきっとね、みんな天ぷらにはうちの天ぷらはっていう思い出があるはずなので、なんかそういう見た人の記憶を喚起するような食べ物の一つだと思うんですよね。それで、メインに天ぷらを持ってきました。
I think that corn tempura is one of the biggest things in this film, and that was something that my mother used to make all the time, and I loved it. I haven't really heard of it very much outside of my family, but apparently it originates from Shojin cooking in Kyoto, and originally, and we always had that in our family, and the sound of the popping corn was always a sign that, oh, this is, cooking is happening in the kitchen. Now I think it's not as common to make tempura at home. I think it used to be, and so for people of a certain age and older, I think it really stimulates memories of those kinds of home cooking moments.
Turning to the cast, which is multi-generational, and everyone just gives fantastic performances, very natural performances. What's your process with working with an actor or an actress in terms of developing their character, and do you allow everything feels so natural? Is there a lot of improvisation on set? Or is everything sort of follow the script exactly?
この映画に関して言うとね、ほぼ全部脚本通りなんですよね。
For this movie, it's almost all entirely exactly as the script.
いくつかのシーンで、脚本通りといっても現場で役者を見ながら発見していくという作業は常にやるので、例えば最初に枝豆を剥きながら母親と主人公の姉が2人で喋ってて、あんた綺麗な顔してなんかおでこもっと出しなさいよって豆むいた手で娘のおでこを触って避けるシーンがあるんですけど、あれは楽屋でキリンさんとユウさんがやってたのね。掛け合いの漫才みたいにずっとああいうずっと誰それが整形だとか誰それのが離婚して慰謝料がいくらだとかそういう世間話をずっと2人でしてるんですけど、そういう流れの中でふっとやって、あ、ここで娘の髪に触るというのがあると、今度ユウさんの娘というか子供が来た時にあそこで台所でちょっと髪の毛を言ってあげてるので、あそこで髪の毛でつながるなと思って、それで楽屋のやり取りをそのままセリフに書いたんですけど、そういうのは結構ありますね。そういう 役者の撮ってない時の様子を観察しながらそれをこう役のセリフに反映させていくというのはよくやるんですけど、やりすぎると怒られるのでこの映画の中でも夏川由衣さん演じた5歳に2度目の結婚をして子連れで再婚してる彼女がどういうもしこういうシチュエーションで、相手の母親に言われて嫌なことは何だって聞いたら容姿のこと姿形のことを言われるのは多分嫌だと思うって例えば何が嫌だって言ったらエクボのこととかを言われるのは嫌だなみたいな話をしてたんだよね。でそのままセリフに書いたらすごい怒られてでもいいシーンになったと思いますけど女の部分を義理の母親にこう触れられる感じっていうんですか、そういうのって多分ああいうシチュエーションでお嫁さんが旦那の実家に行った時の居心地の悪さみたいなものを多分端的に表してると思うんだけど、でもこの辺は非常に日本的な感じかもしれないからな、どこまで通じるか分かんないんですけど、そんなこともしてます。そういうことはよくやります。だからすごく意地悪に日頃から観察してます、役者のことは。
So, in a few of the scenes, there were some discoveries that I made, and I would sort of incorporate them. Like for instance, in that scene where they're peeling the edamame, and she says, "You're a beautiful woman. Show your forehead more," and brushes aside her hair with her, her dirty hands. And that was something that they were doing as if it was like a comedy routine in their waiting room. And I saw that and I thought, oh, I want to put that in the film someplace. And then later it happens again when Yu's kids come and she sort of parts their hair. So I thought that was a nice sort of repetition. And I often like to take these candid moments and use them in the films, but in films. But some actors will get angry if I take too many of them. So, for instance, the woman who's remarried to our main character in this film is basically. I asked her, the actress, what would be the most upsetting to you if you were to go to your mother-in-law's house and she were to ask you. And she said, I think it would be something like, pointing out a dimple or something like that. And I just directly wrote it in. And she was not happy with me when I did that. But something like that, like pointing out a woman's charm kind of a thing, I felt was by an in-law would be a really unpleasant, uneasy sort of experience if you were visiting your new husband's family kind of a thing. Maybe that's kind of a Japanese feeling, so I'm not sure if it translates. But I do that sort of things a lot, so I relentlessly observe my actors in candid moments.
You're also, I think, one of the great directors of children. You get such amazing performances from children in all of your films. And I think you're also one of the great filmmakers of childhood, the way you capture its resilience, its playfulness, its seriousness, its adaptability. Children in childhood always seem to be very strongly present, even if they're in the background of your family films. So on a very practical level, what kind of, how do you go about directing children? How do you get these really nuanced performances or these sort of unselfconscious performances from the children? And then I'll ask the second question after he answers that one. Yeah.
これね、子供には台本、この映画もノーバディノーズを撮った時から子供には台本は渡さずに撮影をしていくというやり方をずっとしているので、この映画も子供は全くストーリーは分からずに撮影現場に来て、撮ってます。おばあちゃん家に、遊びに行きますっていうことだけしか伝えてないです。
So ever since Nobody Knows, and I did this with that film as well, I don't give the child actors a script. So for this film, that was also the case. So I would just tell them things like, "We're going to Grandma's house."
あとはもうその場で耳元で僕がこうささやきながらシーンを作っていくから、こうおじいちゃんに手握られてる時には、じゃあおじいちゃんがこう言うからこう言ってねっていうことをこう瞬間を作っていくだけなんですよね。
And so when I'm on set, I'm basically there next to the kids, just sort of whispering in their ear what's about to happen. For instance, when the kid has his hand touched by the grandpa, I'm telling him, okay, this is going to happen, and this is kind of how you deal with it.
でもあの男の子とても良かったけど、最初に会った時にファミレスで自分なんかドリンクバー行って戻ってきて「何それ?」って言ったら「コーラとジンジャーエールのミックス」って言って、すごい見た目は落ち着いてるのにやっぱりすることは子供なんだなと思って、それでそういうシーンを描きました。やっぱそれもあの子からもらったシーンですね。
And the kid in this, he's a really great boy. When I first met him, was in a family restaurant, and he actually did what he did here, which is he mixed Coke and ginger ale and brought it to our table. And I thought, wow, he's a really calm kid, but he's still very, youthful. He's childish. He's playful.
なるべくだから子供はまあそのままではないですけども、やっぱその子が持っている個性とボキャブラリーに合わせてセリフを書いてあげるようにしてます。それが必ずしもうまくいくわけではないので、オーディションでいろいろ試しながらそういうやり方がをした方が自然に表現ができる子を残してって、でその子たちとそういうある種瞬発力だけを使いながら撮っていく感じなんですよね。
So I don't necessarily have them just be as they are, but I try to learn their vocabulary. So, and that doesn't always go well, but what I try to do is I try to experiment with them in auditions and try and find out what their how to pull out their personality the best. And so I use that a lot during the shoot as well.
経験でしかないので厳密にはよく僕も認識してないですけども、その台本を渡して文字で覚えて、記憶して撮影現場にしてそれを言葉にするよりも、現場で耳から音で入れて口から出した方がどうやら良さそうだっていうことはいろいろ試してみたらなんとなく分かったんですよね。それでそうしてます。歌舞伎とかが多分そういうある種の演劇人たちもそういう言葉の渡し方をしているらしいですけども、日本でいうと多分ね、歌舞伎が一番、歌舞伎とあと落語とかなんだよな、その音で渡す、音で伝えていくっていうジャンルがあるっていうのは聞いたことがありますが、でも映画でも多分僕決して僕が真似したわけじゃないですけども、クレーマーっていう映画のメイキングを見てたら、クレーマーの子役は本当に素晴らしいですけども、やはり台本を渡さずに現場で助監督が毎日今日の撮影について説明をしてセリフを口伝えで練習しながら撮ったというのがメイキングの中に出てきましたから、やっぱりやってる人いるんだなっていうふうに思いました。
So it all pretty much came from experience. I learned that giving a child a script and telling them to memorize the words and doing that doesn't work as well as just telling them so they can hear it in their ears and then they just regurgitate, verbally. And that all came from a lot of experimentation. And I think it's also something that's used a lot in kabuki in Japan, as well as rakugo. It's a very sort of oral genre, I think. So in film, I've noticed that as well. And in the film Kramer, Kramer, I think the kid in that is really great. And watching the making of some of that film, I saw that the AD would basically explain the scene every day to him, and they would basically work on the scene that way.
So I have one more question, then we'll turn it over to the audience. One of the things that's so beautiful about this film is the way that the presence of children, these multi-generational family members, evoke the past and the future, the present, which they all seem sort of trapped in. The way there's all these little triggers for memories, shucking the corn, the song, obviously. The parallels between these two generations, when the son remembers the wrestler's name and the mother remembers the wrestler's name separately. It's in this one house in one day, you seem to capture so many different registers of life. The film is so delicately structured around that. So anyway, I feel like it all leaves us feeling neither happy nor sad. I don't think melancholy is quite the right word for it. I don't think bittersweet is even a good word for it in English. This quality of, I don't know, joyful ambiguity that this all of this, seems to trigger. Is there a particular feeling or a particular word that, and maybe in Japanese word might better describe this feeling that we're left with in terms of the moment in life that we've just seen? It's a very abstract question, but this feeling is so precise, but also so sort of difficult to pin down.
You mean in my words?
Yes. My words are pointless.
そうでも確かにいろんな時間今現在の一日だけ描いてる中にいろんな時間を重ねて描くっていうのは考えてました。だからおじいちゃんが血のつながらない孫の手を握って医者になるかっていうのを息子が見た時に怒るでしょ。あれ多分息子も昔やられた記憶が多分あるんだなって僕は思いながら演出をしてましたけど、そういう誰かと誰かのシーンが別の誰かともうそこにはいない誰かのシーンとして反復されている物語の外側で、そういうことは考えてました。だから時間が重層的に描かれるといいなというのは思ってたんですよね。答えと違うかな質問と。ちょっと待ってね。とりあえずそこまで通訳してもらった間にちょっと考えるからちょっと待って。
He's going to think of something better while I translate. But the first part of the answer is just that, what I intentionally did was to try and fold multiple different times into just this one day. And so, for instance, when the grandfather touches the little boy's hand and says, you have great hands to be a doctor, and the son sees that and gets angry, that was kind of because I felt like that probably happened to him when he was young. And so it's like, one character does something to another where maybe a memory does the same thing to another character. And so that sort of parallel progression of time was intentional, and I wanted that to be part of the film.
ちょっと見終わった後の感じというのはなかなか僕も言葉にしにくいので、言葉がならなくてもいいかなと思ってるんですけど、映画全体で描こうと思ってるのは多分何かが終わった後なんだよね、全部ね。通常だと多分この映画で言うと、要するに息子を事故で亡くすとか、あの主人公が再婚を決意するとか、この物語の後に起きるであろう父親が死ぬとか母親が死ぬとかっていう、通常の映画で描くであろう大きなトピック、物語上の山を全部外して、作ってるんですよね。多分あんまり波風が立たないところで、ないだ海、一見ないだ波のない海なんだけど、近づいて見てみるとその中でうねりが見えるみたいな、なんかそういう水面を描こうっていう意識だったんだよな。だからなんかそういう読後感っていうのなのかな、目指したのは。作品全体として描こうと思ったものはなんかそういうものでした。すいません、答えになってなかったら許してください。
So the feeling that you're left with after the film is over, I think, is maybe it's something that is hard to describe in words, and maybe doesn't need to be described with words. But what I wanted to say with this film is that everything that happens in this film is after something has ended, like losing someone, or getting remarried, or even the death of the parents happens after the movie. And so all these sort of typical peaks of a film, I decided to exclude all of them. And so it's kind of like there's no ripples on this ocean. It's calm, but if you get really close, then you see the ripples on the surface of the water. And so that was kind of a goal that I had in mind when I made the film. I'm not sure if that's a good answer.
It's a wonderful image, I think. Let's turn it over to the audience. We have mics, so when I call on you, wait for the mic to come to you. Let's go way in the back. Let's start in the back on this side. Woman in the back of the third row from the back.
Arigatou gozaimashita. I really like your films, and I remember watching your films was my first influence on understanding cinema. And I remember you talking about how you first watched the Taiwanese new wave films, like Hou Xiaoxian films, how you were really influenced by him. And so by that time, I watched a lot of you guys' films and just be like, this is the way you show through the language. And my question is, since you started from documentary, how do you think the way you understand from to observe and to how you make the films from your first one to After the Storm, how do you think the way you use cinema, the language, and or even to observe, the way you observe, how do you think it changes through time? And if you're still to explore from now, how do you think you'll change your way, or what are the new things you'll explore with the language? Thank you.
Whether the way I observe things has changed, essentially, is what you're asking.
変わってる変わってきてると思いますけどね。それは意識してるわけではないんだけど、気が付くと変わってるっていういろいろあるじゃない。例えばこう両親が健在で息子の時に撮った映画なのね。これは違いますけど、これはシチュエーションがまだ健在、両親が健在でしょ。で僕これ撮ってる時はまだ息子目線で撮ってるんですよね。母親亡くしてますけどまだ子供が生まれてなくて、でこのあともう誰の息子でもなくなったけど子供ができて誰かの父親になった時にやっぱり家族を見る目線は明らかに変わって、親目線で子供を見てるんだよね。それでなるほどこうやって変わってくんだ視点ってと思っているから、それはもう自分が望むか望まないかに関係なく変わってくってことはあるんじゃないですか。だからそれに合わせた多分描写の仕方、人間描写の仕方というのをしていくんだと思います。これから先も。
I think that it has changed. But it's not a conscious thing. It just kind of is. In this film, for instance, his parents are alive, and I was making this film from the son's perspective. But when I became a father myself, I started to look at children in a different way from a parent's perspective. So I started making films as well and observing things from that point of view. So I think it just happens naturally, and that definitely affects my films.
ただドキュメンタリーから変わらずに意識しようと思ってるのは、目の前の人間をジャッジしないっていう、ジャッジを下さないっていう、態度というか倫理というか、この人は正しい、この人は間違ってる、この人は間違ってるから不幸になるべきだ、この人は正しいから救われる、映画のラストで救われるべきだっていうような、なんかそういうこう神の目線を持たずに撮りたいっていうのは多分ドキュメンタリーを経験したから、その倫理観のまま今映画をフィクションを撮っているというか、撮りたいなというふうに思ってる。そこは変わらないつもりでいます。
I keep in mind when documentary filmmaking not to judge whether someone saying something is right or wrong, or saying, oh, what this person is saying is really wrong, so they should suffer, or what this person is saying is very right, so they should go to heaven, like that. And that's kind of like playing God if you judge someone for what they're saying. So I avoid that at all costs, and I try to use that approach with my fiction filmmaking as well.
今日の映画なんかはだからそれほどの善人も出てこないけどそれほどの悪人も出てこないっていう、自分の身の回りにいる人たちに一番近い人たちが出てきて、でもそれが面白いっていうのが理想だなと思ってるんですけど。そんな映画を撮りたいなと思ってます。
I think there aren't a lot of people who are tremendously great or tremendously bad in this film, and in my films in general. I think I like having people who are real, like people who are around me in my real life, and that's my sort of ideal approach, and that's how I want to continue to make movies.
A question from the audience. Let's go right here in front.
You mentioned that there are a lot of autobiographical elements to this. So I was wondering, with regard to casting the mother, grandmother, whether there were specific goals in mind.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part of the question.
With regard to casting the mother, grandmother, whether there were specific goals in mind.
A おばあちゃん役のキキキリンさんというのは、僕が子供の頃からテレビで見ていたホームドラマに 30代からおばあちゃん役で出てたおばあちゃんなんですよね。それでまあ非常に印象に残っていて、いつかこういうホームドラマをやるときには彼女に出てもらいたいというのはもう監督になる前からの念願だったので、今回も彼女に当て書きで書いてます。断られたら多分成立しなかっただろうなと思います。
In terms of the grandmother, Kiki Kirin, she is the kind of person that I used to watch in TV dramas when I was a kid. And since she was in her 30s herself, she would play grandmothers. And so before I even became a director, I knew that I wanted to make a film with her. And so I wrote the role in specifically for her in this film. So if she hadn't accepted the role, I don't know if the film would have gotten made.
Let's go in the back here on this side. Yep. In the yellow sweater.
Thank you for this beautiful film. Can you talk about your editing process for this one and the balancing of so many perspectives in a multi-generational family drama?
どうバランスを取ったか。どうバランスを取ったかね。
The question is how I maintained the balance.
世代間のバランスを意識したかな。あんまり意識してないかもしれないな。
It wasn't a very conscious thing.
これだから、あんまり意識してないな。なんだろう。
I really didn't.
ごめん、編集でというか脚本でなのかな、意識してるの。確かにどういう組み合わせで何を描くかっていうのは意識してるけど、寿司屋のお兄ちゃんがお寿司持ってくるんだよね。法事だからね。それほど本筋に関係ないエピソードだと思われるかもしれないけど、あれが大体始まって25分ぐらいだと思いますけど、あそこで何のために家族が集まってるのかが、外部が身内だけだとそういう話するとすごく嘘くさいんで、外の人間入れて分からせるタイミングが、そこまでギリギリ粘ろうかなとか、1時間で姉夫婦はいなくなって、残りのこれからテーマが始まるのを全体の半分で、切り上げて、その後はメインの役者だけに絞ってこうとか、そういう流れっていうかうねりっていうのは考えました。法事は要するに亡くなって命日にみんなが集まってっていう。
So in the edit, I definitely had certain combinations in mind. Like for instance, the sushi guy delivering the sushi. That was something that happens about 25 minutes in, and that sort of cues the audience in that this is like a special event where they're celebrating the day of the death of their family member. And then I also knew that about 1 hour in, the daughter and her family was going to go away from the story, and then it would be just the main characters that you're left with. So that sort of overall flow was already envisioned.
あと多分すごく大事なのは子供たちだけでいっぺん外に遊びに行くシーンがあるでしょ。サルスベリのピンクの花に触る、ああいうほぼ密室で展開していく時間がずっと持続した時に、どのタイミングであそこでふっと穴を開けて緊張感を外へ逃がすかっていうのを始まって何分ぐらいでやるのか、緊張感の持続は何分ぐらいにするかっていう、その辺は多分編集で随分探ってったような気がします。 それはやってますね。
One of the really important moments, I think, in the film is when the kids go outside and look at the flowers. And what timing to have that happen was important, and we sort of experimented with that in the editing because I knew that there was a certain point where the pressure was going to need to be relieved.
From the audience, let's go right over here, gentleman at the front. Wait for the microphone to come down. Yeah. It's right behind you.
すみません、日本語でいいです。脚本を書かれる際に日常生活のいろいろ断片をいろいろな切り口方ってあると思うんですけど、ただ日常生活書いてるとダラダラしちゃうかもしれないんですけど、監督の作品ってすごい本当無駄がない締まってる。あれってどうやって脚本書いてる時に自分でこうでもないああでもないっていろいろやっぱりどうやって書かれるんですか？
The question is, in your writing, it seems like there's a lot of ways you can approach writing, and a lot of your films deal with very daily, mundane activities, but there's absolutely no excess. There's just it's just great. And so, how do you do that? How do you write, and how do you come up with those kinds of stories?
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much.
この映画に関して言うと、その母親が倒れて、入院して、まあ頻繁にそれまでほとんどほったらかしでさ、年に一度も会ってない状況だったから、病院通ってで脳出血だったんで、ボケが進行しないように話しかける、いろいろ。そうすると昔の話はすごく出てくるから、結構そこで昔話を随分したんだよね。僕が子供の頃の話とかで、そこで話した話をベッドサイドに置いといたノートに書いて、そうすると次の日に来た姉がそれを見て、でまたそこで話した話を書いていくっていうようなことをずっとやったんですよ、2年間。だからノートがね7冊ぐらいできた。それで意外とそれがね、そこに書かれてる話とかちっちゃいエピソードとかさ、天ぷらの話とかもそういうところに出てくるし、そういうのが、そういう断片が随分大きく役立ったと思いますけどね。日頃からノートにそういう断片を、思いついたこととかセリフとかシーンとか出会った人とかは書き留めるようにしてますし、最近だと携帯のメモっていうのに電車とかだとノート取り出すの大変なんでメモにしといて後で写すとか、そういう地道な作業をしてます。はい。
When my mother was hospitalized, up until that point, we would barely see each other in a year, and because she was in the hospital, and to sort of avoid her going senile, losing her memory, we talked a lot. We talked about my childhood and how everything went, and whenever we talked, I would write down what we're talking about in a notebook, and I would leave that by her bedside, and my older sister would come and she would look at what was written in the book and then continue on to those memories and continue writing. And so we did that for 2 years, and we ended up with 7 notebooks. So one of the memories in there, of course, was the tempura and that sort of thing. So all of these little pieces were really significant. And even on a daily basis, I keep a notebook with me that I write in. If I'm on the train or something like that, I'll keep notes on my cell phone and then transfer that onto my notebook. And that sort of very mundane practice is what I do.
あとテクニックと言えるほどのものでもないけど、無駄がなく見えるっていうのはすごく嬉しいですけど、大体の会話を途中で始めて途中で終わるっていう、ゼロから始めないっていう、初めましてから使わないっていう、そういう途中からスタートするんだけど、その前何話してたか分かるようにするっていうようなことはやってますね。いろんなシーンでやってると思いますね。寿司屋の兄ちゃんも多分そうだと思いますけど。
Um, I really appreciate the comment that you think that there's no excess in my scripts. What I do a lot is that I never start at the beginning of a conversation and I never end a scene at the end of a conversation. So it's always the middle part, but just the right part where that gives you the enough information that you know what's going on, which I think is the same case with the guy who delivers the sushi in this film.
Another question from the audience. Let's go right here on the aisle.
I was curious about, you've referenced memory many times in many of your answers, and of course it's a recurring theme in a number of your films. Without Memory is one of my favorite of your early documentaries, and then of course Afterlife. And I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit about the relationship between memory and film, and the function of film as memory, and vice versa, and how that affects the way you tell stories and how you view things.
についてちょっとお話ししてもらえますか。映画の中での記憶と映画自体が記憶っていう役目を果たすじゃないですか。記憶を伝えるっていう。でそれについてちょっとお話ししてもらえますかっていう。
広いぞ。広い質問だな。
That's
そ
a
れにつ
pretty
いて
broad
の
question.
それについての何をだろ
What about the two things
う。映画の
should
中
I?
の
It's the memory, like memories within films, and then also
Whether or not film is somehow a physical manifestation of memory, if that makes more sense, if that's the impression I'm getting.
うん記憶の表れ記憶だけではないと思います。基本的には映画を撮るときに何を意識するかというと記憶と想像力と観察っていう3つをバランスをどう取るかっていうことなんだよね。で記憶っていうよりは想起ってリメンバリング思い起こすっていうなんかもう少し動的な捉え方をした方が自分の認識には近いんだけどその3つの中で例えば今回このステルウォーキングなんかは記憶を一番使って作ってますし作品によってはすごく観察を重視して、作るものもありますしその辺はバランスは作品ごとに変わりますけどその重要なうちの一つだと思います記憶は。
I don't think it's only memory. Basically, when I approach films, I have three aspects, and one is memory, one is creativity, and one is observation. And so, I think the word maybe remembering is a little more appropriate than the word memory, for instance. But like Still Walking is mainly, I think, focused on memory. And some other films are more focused on observation. So it depends on the film in that way.
Question, things. Right in the middle, in the back, right? Yeah, right there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you.
一番最初か
No,
ら
no,
ね
wrong one.
元
Right
気を
behind her. Right behind her. Yeah, sorry about that. Right there with the flower in her. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you for being here, and I really, this is one of my favorite films, and I have always go to it whenever I miss home and missing my family. My question, I've recently read the novel as well, and my question is, in what is the relationship to you, not specifically just this movie, but the film and the word, and to you, does this story exist fuller in one form than the other? I'm sort of just really curious. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Oh, I was curious about the relationship between the word and the film, between words and film to Mr. Kore-eda, and whether this particular story, if he felt like it existed fuller in one form or the other. but
In terms of the film's relationship to, let's say, a novel?
the same novel that was under yes.
But this wasn't an adaptation, right? Right, so the film wasn't based on a novel.
Right. I mean,
So-
the same. He published the novel version
Oh,
of
okay,
the film
I
as
got it.
well.
So there was
Yeah.
there was a novel based on the film script that was published, which I wasn't aware of.
書いた。うん。
Okay. Were you involved? Sorry for that. Were you involved in the publication of the novel, and is there a relationship between? Well, is the story different on film as is in the novel? That how is the story inflected between the two mediums? Is there a relationship between the written word and the visual?
うん。うん。うん。ああ。書いたものは随分違うな。一日の話ではなくてかなり、自分の子供時代まで遡った例えば蝶々のエピソードとかそういうものに広げていってるので映画よりはもう少し時間のスパンが長いものになってると思います。もともと僕小説家になりたかったっていうのがあるもんだから物書きになりたかったのでやめればいいのにオファーされると「あ書きます書きます」って言っちゃうんだよね。それで後ですごく苦労するんですよやっぱり時間を取られるので。だけど多分「ワンダフルライフ」とこの「歩いても歩いても」とその前にやった「花」っていう時代劇とは全部自分で書いてるんでね。その後さすがにちょっと辛くなって共作にしてもらって、労力を少し少なくしてますけれども何かその映画はやっぱりこのようにすごくパーソナルな映画であってもやはり共同作業なので一旦みんなで共有するものになってそれをこう後にノベライズというか小説に文字にしていくってもう一度自分に取り戻す作業なんだよな。で自分の中にもう一度それをこう抱きかかえて、この作品とさよならするっていう感覚でいうと書いてる作品の方がそこでこう決着がついてる感じはしますやっぱり。この作品はもう本当にノベライズ出した時点で僕の母親に対するものグリーフワークは終わったっていう感じがします。
As you probably know, the novel is very different from the film. In the novel, I go way back to my childhood and expanded quite a bit from what the film is. The time frame is much longer, and I actually wanted to be a novelist originally, and so I should sometimes say no, but whenever I'm offered that kind of job, I tend to take it. And so, but it's hard and it's very time consuming. And so for 3 of my films, Hana and Still Walking and one other, I wrote all of the novels after the films myself, but all the others I co-wrote with other authors. And personally, I think making a film is a collaboration, and so it's something that you share with others, and that's how it comes to life. But later, when the film is done, I feel like sort of taking possession back of the film again and saying goodbye to the film. That's sort of possible by turning the film into a novel, and so it's kind of like my final goodbye. So in terms of this film specifically, it was kind of like once I wrote the novel, it's like my grief work was done.
We have time for a few more questions. Let's go, gentleman right here. Let's hurry the mic up to him.
Thank you so much for today. May I ask him in Japanese?
Sure.
一つ気になるところがあって、 夜黄色い蝶々が、部屋に入ってきて、でキキキリンさんがそれを追いかけてるシーンで、一つショットが気になってて、手前でキキキリンさんが蝶々追ってて、その奥で阿部寛さんがそれを見つめてて、そこにフォーカスが当たってて、で阿部寛さんがそのままフレームアウトしてから、後ろにかかってるおじいちゃんがかけた手ぬぐいにフォーカスが当たってて、それが夜風にこうゆらゆら揺れてるっていうシーンがあったんですけど、あれは撮った時に何か特別な意図があって撮られたんですか？
同業の方？同業者ですか？
僕アスパイアリングディレクターです。
The question was, there's one shot in particular where at night the butterfly comes into the room and the grandmother's chasing it, and there's one shot in particular where she's in the foreground out of focus and Abe is there in the background in focus for a moment. He goes out of frame, and then the towel that the grandfather left is sort of just blowing in the wind there in focus, and I'm wondering what the meaning is to that. And his response was, are you a coworker of mine? Are you in my business? And
よかったでしょ？
that was great, right? I'm curious of the intention.
意図か。でも今すごい嬉しいのはね、僕この映画の中であのカットが多分ね、一番とは言わないけど結構好きなカットなんだよな。あれはでも最初から意図してたわけではなくて、役者が動いてみて、この手ぬぐい、白い手ぬぐいがここで揺れてるのはちょっと怖いなと思ったんだよな。ゾッとするな。それでね、フォーカスをあそこへ残そうっていう判断は現場でしました。お芝居見てから。当初の予定ではちょっと違うカット割りになってたと思いますけど、あれは気に入ってます。だから現場で発見したアングルだったんだと思います。
I'm really happy that that's the shot that you're mentioning, because it's pretty much one of my, if not the favorite shot of mine in the film, one of my favorites. And it wasn't intended at first. I mean, I didn't have that planned. It was something that we discovered on set, that when he went out of frame, it was sort of left there blowing in the wind, and it just felt kind of eerie. And I decided to keep that shot going, and so I'm really happy that we discovered that on set. My interpretation was that it was the sun's spirit sort of blowing in the wind. Was that any thought of yours?
でもいいんじゃないそれで。
That sounds like a good idea.
Time for a few more questions. Let's go over here.
Thank you. I really appreciate the camera work in your film. Like I really appreciate the stillness, and we know you really move the camera, but when you do, the camera movement really goes like in and out, push in and out. You either booming up and down, track left or right. It's like, I guess my question is like, why you keep the camera movement and two-dimensional instead of like three-dimensional? And the other question following up with that is like, what's your thought process of where you're gonna put the camera and when you decide how to move the camera?
どうやって下すか。こ これ基本的にはフィックス、ほぼフィックスの絵で撮ってて、それは最初から自分ではそうしようって決めてましたね。さっきの話に出てきた蝶々紛れ込んで母親がこうちょっと取り乱すところだけ手持ちで足元取ったりしてるんだよね。それ以外は基本的には動いてない。ラストがクレーンで登っていく絵があるぐらいで、墓地は横移動してるか。家の中は基本的にはそんなに動かずに撮ろうっていうのは、設計図としてはそういう設計図を描いて、判断は自分で僕がしてますね。この映画に関して言うと本当に脚本も、絵コンテもかなり綿密に描いてはいるので、それにのっとった形でやってます。あんまり面白くない答えですけど。
So I decided for this film that I mostly just wanted to use a fixed camera position. And that was sort of my intention from the beginning. One of the rare moments where there's some handheld is when the butterfly's in the house and she's sort of wobbling around, and there's some shots on her feet and sort of thing. But there was also the crane shot at the end where we go up, and then there's the dolly at the grave. But I decided most of the camera movement in this film, and I did a lot of storyboards. So that was part of a lot of it was in the planning. So yeah, it might not be a very interesting answer. But.
All right, last question. Let's go right in the middle here. Wait till the mic to come.
ずっと最初から手を挙げられてるので
You've had your hand up since the very beginning.
ようやくたどり着きました。
The dynamic and the chemistry among all the actors are just so beautiful and wonderful that makes me truly believe that you're actually a family on screen. So my question would be, how did you find the chemistry among all of them? Because sometimes when you find two great actors, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have great chemistry that make their relationship very believable to the audience. So did you find it? Did you look for and find the chemistry among them during the audition, or it's afterwards you help them to build up their chemistry during rehearsals? Thank you.
.でもね、やっぱね、化学反応はね、キャスティングした時点で8割方決まると僕は思ってますけどね。演出でできることは2割だなと思いますけど。
I think what's possible in, I think what's 80% of chemistry, I think, is determined in the auditions, and then what's possible with directing is only about 20% of that.
もちろん時間をかけてこの作に関して言うと本当に、本読み全員揃って本読みをやって、そこから本直しをして、あれはロケーション、実際の病院とセットで作った台所とか今との組み合わせで撮ってますけど、立ち稽古的なこともやって、動きながらセリフを言う、料理で手を動かしながらやり取りをするみたいなことはかなり細かくリハを繰り返しながらセリフの量を調整していくような作業もしてるので、そういうプロセスもうまくいったんだろうなと思いますけどね。
We spent quite a bit of time. Of course, there was a table read, and then there was a rewrite, and then the actual shooting was done on a combination of practical sets and also, practical locations and also actual sets. But the sort of cooking while talking and that sort of thing was practiced pretty extensively. And then we adjusted a lot of the lines or took out a lot of the lines to sort of match some of the actions that were happening.
さっきちょっと触れ損ないましたけど、姉役で主人公の姉役で出てるユウさんっていう女性が、最初母親と並んで大根削ってる「Nobody Knows」という映画で母親役をやってくれた方なんですけども、Nobody Knowsの時には子供たちには台本を渡さなかったので、ユウさんにも台本を渡してないのね。で全部現場で作ってってるんですけど、今回はさすがにこういうホームドラマですし、相手がキキキリンさんとか原田芳雄さんっていう、プロフェッショナルなので、覚えてきてねって台本を渡したんだけど、一切覚えてこない。だから台本を開いた形跡がないまま現場に来てですね、驚くべきことにリハをやりながらゼロから作っていくっていうことをこの映画でもやってるんですよ。だからやっぱり音でしか入れてない彼女は瞬間瞬間でその相手のセリフ聞いて初めて自分のセリフをこう言うみたいな。結果的にはね、彼女が接着剤になってるんだよね。そのいろんなお芝居の潤滑油って言ってもいいんですけど、で彼女だけが僕が書いてない言葉もちょいちょい挟んでるんですよ。それはすごく助かってますけど、セリフとセリフがと人の動きの中で少し間ができた時に彼女が何気ないことをポンと隙間を狙って放り込んでくるっていうのが多分結果的には非常にそういう家族のやり取りを動的にしてるっていうんですかね、生ものに変えてってる気はしますね。だから結果的には良かったと思いますけど、撮影してる時にはもうハラハラし通しでですね、大変こうハラハラしたのを覚えてますけど。
So there's one thing that I forgot to mention, which is that Yu, who plays the sister of the main character in the film, and in the beginning, scraping the daikon and the radish and that kind of thing. For Nobody Knows, she plays the mother on that film. On that set, all the children didn't have the script, and so it was a conscious decision that she wasn't going to have the script either. So we would just talk about what we were going to shoot when we're shooting it. And however, in this film, I knew that we had actors, like experienced actors like Kiki san and others, and so I wanted her to have the lines memorized. However, she showed up the first day of the shoot, having not ever opened the script, it seemed, at least from what I could see. So she didn't memorize any of the lines. So we created all of that, starting with the rehearsals. And so the great thing that allowed was for her to sort of become the glue or the oil maybe in that sort of family dynamic, meaning she actually saved a lot of moments because she, when things were just sort of starting to pick up in a certain scene, she would just find these tiny little moments to just blurt something out, and those little lines that she would pop in would really bring a lot of life to the scenes. So that was great, although it made for myself being very nervous all the time on set, wondering if it was going to go well.
Kore-eda will be back with us tomorrow night for a Q&A following Mabarosi, so please come back for that. But for now, let me just say what a pleasure and honor it is to have you here on stage. Thank you so much for being here with us.